지금 주님의 영광교회 EM 패스토로 하시는 EM 패스토 글로리 처치 윤희송 박사님 나오시겠습니다. 좀 크게 박수해 주시죠. 와. 감사합니다. 지금 클레르먼트 사회윤리 PhD 과정에 계시는 강우중 전도사님 마지막으로 모시겠습니다. 네. 어디 계시죠? 네.
안녕하세요. 주님의 영광교회 윤혜성 목사라고 하는데요. 전 한국말을 진짜 I can't really speak Korean, so please take good notes so you can translate. Okay, thank you. I am the EM pastor over at Glory Church of Jesus Christ, and I received my PhD from Biola in intercultural studies, and my study was on why second generation pastors leave the first generation immigrant church. And so I spoke with and interviewed 17 different pastors, and this is a little bit of my study there. 근데 I think what Dr. Michael shared just a little bit, Pastor Michael shared just a little bit about moving from dependent to interdependent to dependent. For the sake of just in my terms, the way that I understood it, and he has much more expertise in this field than I do, but interdependent, to my understanding, was where they shared the same campus. So EM and KM, two completely different pastors, two completely different sessions, but same resources, like he said, same projects, same, campus, space. And then dependent would be these now EM churches that are, or I guess multi-ethnic churches that are now emerging, that we see there's a lot of them even popping up here in Los Angeles. And now I believe a lot of second generation pastors want to become interdependent or dependent, as Pastor Michael shared. And we want to move toward interdependence, and we have a vision to move toward interdependence, but it's really difficult to move toward interdependence if the first generation pastor does not have that same heart or that same vision. Now, having said that, I love my senior pastor. He's my father. Actually, Shin Moksa님 is my father. I was married 6 years ago, so my different last name. But I love my father. I respect my father so much. And I was sharing with somebody over lunch, my father thinks he has a very, very open mentality for first generation. He's not here, so I shouldn't be speaking about him. But, he thinks he's very open-minded, which he is. But I believe first generations thinking of open-mindedness even, and second generations, it's different because we're completely two separate cultures. I believe we have expectations that we should think alike and we should act alike, we should behave alike, because we look the same on the outside. After all, we like kimchi jjigae together, and we like, to celebrate Tor. Tor's a big thing. I have an 8-month-old son, and we're trying to save money to do a Tor now, but we're actually completely different, East and West. And so second generation wants to move toward interdependence, but it's very, very difficult. And so ultimately what I think is second generation, based on the study, they end up leaving. They desire interdependence or dependence, but they end up leaving and starting altogether new churches. And so we see a lot of these churches now coming up and being birthed here in Southern California. What I found is the reason why, there are many factors, sure. Of course, number one, if the Lord calls, and if God calls us to church plant, then we need to go. There's no if, and, or buts about that. But apart from that, separate from that, I found that the reason why a lot of second generation pastors are leaving is because of power struggle. And what I mean by power struggle, and I know Dr. Hertig was here just a little while ago, and she wrote a lot on power struggle, but it's happened in our church as well, where the KM pastor, Irisem Moksa님, will say, come to the EM pastor, to a second generation pastor, come work with me. And so then the second generation pastor is thinking, okay, we're going to work side by side like this. We're going to be partners like this. So we will discuss together, we will meet together, we will have lunch together, coffee together, or whatever. But the first generation pastors thinking of working together is this, you see, where the first generation pastor makes the decisions and the second generation pastor just obeys. And so for first generation pastors, they might be little details, but to second generation, it's a huge difference. How come you didn't consult me? Why didn't you ask me? And then first generation says, you're so 교만해. Why would I discuss with you? This is my decision. And not saying that either is wrong or it's just different. I think the way that we think is different. And so, for instance, first generation pastor will decide, okay, our church, we need to move location. Second generation pastor wants to discuss together, where's the EM location going to be, or where are we going to move? But the first generation pastor just goes ahead and makes the decision, announces it to the rest of the KM pastor meeting on Tuesday morning or whenever you have your Tuesday meeting or your pastor meeting, and it comes a shock to the second generation pastor. So ultimately, at the end of the day, the reason why I call it power struggle is because second generation wants to be treated with equal regard to the first generation pastor. But that's difficult. I believe in a hierarchical, in a first generation Eastern mentality. On top of that, I believe second generation EM pastors, we feel like we're treated as kids. I don't think he meant this, but even in our dialogue when 오목사님 before said EM 학생들이 오실 텐데, but everyone here is 30, 40, 50 years old. I'm not saying 오목사님, I know it's okay. It's okay. No, it's okay. But I'm just saying, I think even in our language, we always say EM 애들. And EM, we always refer to KM adults. We always say 부모님들. But we're, I'm in my 30s. Everyone here is 40, 50 years old. We have our careers. We have children. Our children are starting to have children. But just because we speak English, we're treated as children. And not only that, but EM is categorized as education department. Even if structurally in the church, this baggage is coming out. It's like a venting session. Sorry, Dad. So it's, if... Even though structurally EM is, senior pastor is here and EM is here and education department is separate, because we use the same building as education department, or, if there's Christmas presentation, EM, why don't you perform something during Christmas presentation or something like this? Just little things like that makes EM pastors and the congregation members feel like children, and hence there's no ownership. If you ask EM members, why are you leaving the church? Or, they'll say, I want to find my own church. This isn't my church. This is my parents' church. And because they were raised in this church and they think that this is their parents' church, they want to find their own identity, they leave. Of course, granted, there are some exceptions, and I believe Yeongnak is one of those churches that we really strive to be like. And like Pastor Sam said here earlier, even when we invite second-generation pastors to symposiums or services, we have joint services. But joint services in the fact that everything is in Korean, 찬양's in Korean, prayer is in Korean, only the sermon is translated into English. So it's not really a combined service then, is it? That I'm just speaking from a second-generation perspective. Now, having said that, I know I'm going much longer than 5 minutes, and I apologize for that. But I'm not saying that it's just a first generation problem or fault. Second generation, I absolutely agree. We're at fault too. We've been pointing fingers and, we're not receiving enough treatment. We haven't, what have you done for us? You're not treating us right. Where I understand that EM pastors, in our pride and arrogance, we expect just first generations to speak English and to just to understand and accept me, whereas we haven't done the same. So I understand that, and I apologize on behalf. In conclusion, though, I want to say, Dr. Hertig's study, and even Pastor Michael said 20 years ago, he thought, okay, this model isn't going to work. But now 20 years later, in 2012, we are asking the same questions. How can we keep the second generation, or now the third generation, from leaving? Whereas I think they've already left. If not, they're already in transition and they're already leaving. So I wonder if the question should not then be, what can we do now that they have left? or what can we do to bless them, or I don't know what the question should be, but we see them leaving. So what should we do from here? And I want to just leave with that question. Thank you so much. I'm sorry. I spoke
You are
out of
right on
place.
target.